So we are just a couple weeks, this week and next week, and we're wrapping up our series dealing with the truth. And so this week, as I was working on this series, I kept kind of trying to figure out what I wanted to talk about and kind of where we wanted to go. And as a process of this, I ran across a couple quotes by a man named Stanley Hauerwas, and some of you have heard of him before, probably a lot of you have not. I would argue that Stanley is probably the best living Christian ethicist. He taught at Duke for many years, at Duke Divinity School. It has been a huge influence on me and on my theology and on what I understand about Christian ethics. But part of this, I started looking up because he writes a lot about the nature and why do we lie. That's one of those things. He's written quite a bit about that. And so as I was kind of looking and trying to find some things that he had said and kind of work through some of his thought, I came across a commencement address that he gave at the University of Aberdeen in 2017. And if you have ever watched many commencement addresses or have been to some of those yourself, you know that part of the whole process is whoever is the speaker gets up and they give their big advice to the graduates. Like, this is what you need to know. Leaving this school, this is the thing that you need to know. And so it was no different in this address, but Stanley Hauerwas gets up, and the statement he makes is, he says this, he says, here's my advice, all right? Here's his groundbreaking advice. Do not lie. Now that kind of sent me on, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some other things he said in the address, but it kind of sent me down this path of looking at some different things and why is this such an important thing for Stanley Hauerwas. And as I kept looking at this, I found another quote by him that is going to kind of ruffle a little bit of our feathers sometimes because it's a little hard to think through. But Hauerwas makes this statement: a Christian is someone who is unable to lie. A Christian is someone who is unable to lie. Now, I want you to kind of process that, and that's what we're going to talk a lot about. Why is this true, which I think it is. Is this true, and why is this so important? Why is us as the people of God being truthful, why is that so important? In that address that he gave at the University of Aberdeen, he quoted a philosopher, which I'm sure most of you woke up this morning and thought, you know, the way I'd like to start my day is with a little Wittgenstein. And I'm sure most of you thought that. And so one of the quotes he used in his address was from Wittgenstein, which says, "The truth can only be spoken by someone who is already at home in it, not by someone who still lives in untruthfulness." The truth can only be spoken by someone who is already at home in it, not by someone who still lives in untruthfulness. Now, I want you to just kind of, some of these things, I want them to kind of be ruminating through your head, but this kind of takes us to an important place. And the place this brings us is kind of asking some questions. One of the things that Stanley Hauerwas, I think, would tell us is the way he taught is his teaching style, and if you ever read any of his books, the way he would teach students on more of the university level, not necessarily on the seminary level, is his goal was to make you really, really mad. Like he loved just to tick people off. And once he made you mad, he would say to you, "Why are you so mad?" And in the process of explaining why you are so mad, then he would be able to say to you, "Because that's what you really believe." If we use a quote like he said, a Christian is someone who is unable to lie, and if that upsets you, he would ask you, why are you upset by it? What about this upsets you? And part of what he would want us to do is he would want us to learn a task, and the task is, how do we ask the right questions? What are the right questions? If someone is a Christian and that person cannot lie, and if the truth, according to Wittgenstein, is the truth can only be spoken someone who is at home in the truth, then the question we have to ask is, what does it mean to be at home in the truth? So my question for us today is this question: what does it mean to be at home in the truth? In order to answer that, I want to turn to Colossians. And so let's go to Colossians chapter 1, verse 9 through 14. And Colossians is one of my favorite epistles of Paul. It's one that we kind of look over. Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, we talk about those a lot. And then sometimes Colossians gets skipped. But Colossians is a powerful, powerful epistle from Paul. And he starts his statement of really kind of telling the people, this is what I'm praying for you. And we're going to come back to prayer at the very end. But this is what I am praying for you about. Or this is how I am praying for you. So chapter 1, verse 9 says, for this reason also, since the day we heard this, we haven't stopped praying for you. So this is what I'm praying for this church. This is how I'm praying for them. We are asking that you may be filled with the knowledge of his will in all wisdom and spiritual understanding, so that you may walk worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing to him, bearing fruit in every good work and growing up in the knowledge of God, being strengthened with all power, according to his glorious might, so that you may have great endurance and patience, joyfully giving thanks to the Father who has enabled you to share in the saints' inheritance in the light. Verse 13, he has rescued us from the domain of darkness and transferred us into the kingdom of his Son he loves. In him, in his Son, we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. So let's take just a moment. I want to walk back through this passage with you and kind of give you a little bit of an outline. I don't like having a whole lot of stuff up on the screen when it comes to this, but I've got a whole lot up there right now. I know I don't love it, but I kind of tried to take this verse and kind of break down what they're praying for the church. So if Paul is praying for Colossians, for the church in Colossae, this is what he's praying for. And I just tried to kind of summarize this for you because I want you to see it. What is he praying for? He's praying that you might be filled with the knowledge of his will in all wisdom and spiritual understanding. Okay, that's an important thing to pray. To be filled with wisdom and knowledge, to walk worthy of the Lord, to bear good fruit, or to bear fruit in every good work, and to grow in the knowledge of God. We have knowledge there twice, in case you didn't, if you're keeping score, notice that. That you may be strengthened with all power. What does that strengthening look like? For great endurance and patience, joyfully giving thanks to the Father, sharing in the saints' inheritance in the light. This is what Paul is telling the people. This is what I'm praying for. When I pray for you, these are the things I am praying for you. And I would argue, in this context, I think Paul would tell us as well with Stanley Hauerwas, this gives us a little bit of a picture of what it looks like to be at home in the truth. To live in the truth is to be someone who is filled with the knowledge of his will and all wisdom and spiritual understanding, someone who is walking worthy of the Lord, someone bearing fruit in every good work, someone growing in the knowledge of God, someone strengthened with all power and great endurance and patience, giving thanks, joyfully giving thanks, sharing in the inheritance of the saints. This is what it looks like to be at home. This is what it looks like to live in that world. In verse 13, he kind of wraps it up to say to us, and he rescued us from the domain of darkness. Now, when we get back to the end, we're going to kind of go back to last week. But last week, we talked about Satan. We talked about the devil. That is the domain of darkness. He has rescued us from that. To do what? He's rescued us from the darkness and transferred us into the kingdom of his Son, whom he loves. And that kingdom, that Son is what? At home in the truth. Living in the truth is the truth. And we have been transferred from that domain of darkness into his Son, and that changes our lives. We are people, as Paul tells us, who are shaped by that redemption, who are shaped by that forgiveness. This is what it looks like. So, if we kind of take all of that, let's talk kind of some practicality pieces. And our first kind of question is why would we ever lie? Why would we ever lie? Well, in order to answer this question, we have to kind of understand life. Okay, I'm going to explain life to y'all. Are y'all ready for this? Our lives, whether you want to admit it or not, every one of our lives are constructed of stories. The way we communicate with one another is through story. We tell stories about our lives. We tell stories about what we have experienced. This week, my kids were at camp on Mid-South District, and they got back on Thursday night. Heather and I, all of us, most of us in this room, had a long week of VBS. It's Thursday night. We're exhausted. The kids got home at like 4:30 in the afternoon, which we left about 4:30 in the afternoon, or 5-ish to come up here for dinner. So we didn't really even get to talk to them. We get home. We all get cleaned up. The kids come in our at our bedroom, and they do what? Tell us stories. They don't get there and say, here's a list of all the facts of what happened. This is who spoke. This is who we talked to. That wasn't what they did. They came through and they told us stories. They told us stories about what happened. They told us funny stories. They told us silly stories. They told us all the crazy things that happen at camp stories. Because our lives are constructed of stories. This is the way that we live. And so our lives are constructed of stories, and part of this was what we understand is that if our lives are made up of stories, we are often tempted to lie because of pride and power. Now, what does that have to do with our stories? Well, pride is central to why we lie. So if we're going to do the old fisherman's tale, which some of us a few weeks ago on Wednesday night in men's group, we talked about lying, and Jay, who is the fisherman of our church, Jay told us about one of his friends who tells fisherman stories. That's what people that fish. That's part of it. This is what we caught, but those stories. Why do you tell those stories? Or my kid did this, or my kid did this, and you're not always telling the truth. Why do we do those things? Because of pride. Because we want people to think something of us. We are tempted to lie because of pride and because of power. I've been listening for the past few weeks to a podcast. I've told some of you about it. The podcast is called Scamanda. It's about a woman named Amanda C. Riley. She's from San Jose, California, and she decided to start, and I haven't finished it, so I don't really know how it all plays out, but she decided to tell her world online, her church, all of this stuff, that she had cancer. And it comes out that she didn't have cancer, but there's a story, and of all the stories they tell, the one that hurts me the most is her standing in front of her church of 4,000 people and them coming and bringing money to her to pay for her cancer treatment and throwing cash at her. And you listen to this story, and there's so many times in the podcast I listen to it and I think, why would you even lie there? Like, you don't even have to lie. And people that you know that lie, there are times in life where they lie and you think, you didn't even need to lie. Well, why would they lie? 2 reasons: pride and power. Pride and power. You see, one of the things that we understand is that if our lives are constructed by stories, and if we struggle with pride and power, that causes us to lie. One of the things that happens is that these 2 things come together. And when these 2 things come together, we have a decision to make. In our lives, the stories we tell, are the stories true? And there are people in this world who construct stories of their lives that are false. We call them false narratives. And they begin to tell these stories about their lives, and these stories aren't true, and they go through life, and then they have this realization. If I have constructed this world, if I have constructed this life of false narratives, there is a point when I have to make a decision. Do I change my life, or do I change the truth? And for a lot of people, and to use the example of Amanda C. Riley, in her world, it was way easier to change the truth than it was to change her life. It was easier to construct a world where she didn't tell the truth. It was easier to construct a world where she was dying of cancer than it was to construct a world where she told the truth. And people go through this. There's a great little book written, and I know I'm going to be quoting Stanley Hauerwas a lot, but it's because I've spent the past few weeks reading a lot of his writings because he writes so much about this issue. But there's a great little book called The Character of Virtue. He had a godchild who lived in England, and so he would write her letters. And they took these letters and they made them into a book, and the book is called The Character of Virtue. And this was one of the statements he made to his godchild. He said, "The distance between how we live and what we know to be true is painful and tempts us to change the truth rather than change our lives. Sometimes it's easier to create another world and to just decide I'm going to live in that world instead of telling the truth." And why do we do that? For pride and because of power. Because we don't want people to think something that's less of us. We don't want people to know the truth, because then they'll know that we're not as great as our stories might make us out to be, or our children aren't as great as we make them out to be, or maybe our children are worse than we make them out to be. And we decide it's easier to construct a new world, to construct a new truth, than to tell the truth. And we struggle with this. The last point on why we lie is that we often lie because we don't want our limits exposed. We fear our foolishness will be on display. We often lie because we don't want our limits exposed. We don't want we fear that our foolishness, or we could put a lot of words there. We fear that our weakness would be exposed. We fear that our lack of understanding would be exposed. We fear that whatever I have made myself to be, I won't be what I've made myself to be if you knew the truth. And as Christians, we would say, who I am and what I am made to be is not defined by the untruths I tell. It's defined by a Savior who is the truth. But we lie because we don't want our limits exposed. We don't want people to know the truth. Let's look at a couple passages. Let's kind of take a moment to see what happens when we tell the truth. Let's kind of flip this and look at the other side of the coin. Let's go to Ephesians. We were in Colossians, so you can flip over just a couple books to Ephesians, chapter 4. And we'll look at verses 15 and 16. "But speaking the truth in love, let us grow in every way into him who is the head, Christ. From him, the whole body fitted and knit together by every supporting ligament promotes the growth of the body for building itself up in love by proper working of each individual part." So if our first question was, why do we lie? Then the next piece is kind of what happens when we tell the truth. What happens when we tell the truth? Well, two of the richest fruits of truthfulness are trust and peace. Two of the richest fruits that we get from telling the truth are trust and peace. I was joking with the men a couple weeks ago because this year, I don't know how y'all did, but in the parish house, something happened. We were slammed by taxes this year. It was just a rough tax year in our house. We paid more than we've paid, and we just, like every time I kept messing with TurboTax, like why is this number the way, and finally it gets, April 15th, and you're like, just push the button and we'll write this stupid check. It just hurt. And so Heather's sister, they were talking on speakerphone the other night, and something came up about taxes, and Dawn made a comment like, well, are you afraid the IRS is going to call? And I'm like, if the IRS calls because they think we cheated on our taxes, we are terrible cheaters because we paid out the nose. Like, we are the worst cheaters ever because we paid way more. I feel like we paid more than we were supposed to pay, but I think we did it all right. But there is a freedom of knowing. I don't have to worry because guess what? I have peace because I know if the IRS calls me and says we want to do an audit, I'm like, well, y'all probably owe me money because I think I messed something up. I don't think I lied. I think y'all messed something up. But there's a trust and a peace of knowing when I have told the correct story, when I have been honest, when I have been truthful, there is a trust and there is a peace. of knowing that what I am presenting or what you are presenting is a real picture of who I am. I don't have to keep up with all the other stories. I don't have to keep up with the untruths. And one of the things here that we see that Paul reminds us of, not only do we find trust and peace, but we also get to live our lives being who we are. Speaking the truth means we must be what we seem to be. That who we are is who we are. And there is an incredible amount of freedom in that. And Paul tells us, as a body of believers, do you want to come together? Do you want to have unity? Do you want to have life? Well, all of that starts when we tell the truth to each other. When we live openly and honestly before each other, when we are people of the truth, God has the ability to bring us together in unity. Because I know that what I am living out, whether that's good things, whether it's struggles, all of those pieces are things that I don't have to worry. I don't have to worry about you finding out my deep, dark secret because everybody knows this is what you struggle with. It changes the unity. It changes the life of a church. Look at what Paul says just a little bit later in that passage in Ephesians, verse 25. Therefore, put away lying, speak the truth, each one to his neighbor. Why? Because we are all members of one another. Now think through how this verse lines up to what Paul said earlier in the same chapter. When we speak the truth in love, we are knitted together as a body. We are brought together as a body. And then Paul reminds us, when we put away lying and we speak the truth, each one to his neighbor, we know we are members of one another. That we walk with one another in the truth. That we walk with one another in our struggles. It brings unity, it brings life when we are people who tell the truth. Last week, one of the statements I made at the very end of my sermon, we were talking about the devil, and I talked about what a life in Christ looks like, but I also talked about what a life in the devil looks like. Do y'all remember this? And I said this to you. A life of isolation and lies deforms us into the image of the devil. When we isolate ourselves, when we tell lies, the result is isolating ourselves. We've pushed other people out of our lives, and when we have done that, it deforms us and it changes us not into the picture of who Christ is, not into the Father that we talked about last week, but it changes us into a different image. An image of deception. An image of the accuser, an image of lies. It changes us into something else that we were not created to be. There is no life in this image. There is no hope. There is no peace. There is no trust. This is not the image that God has created any of us to live in. This is an image that was created by the devil, and it's not who you were created to be. But living a life of trust, of openness, keeping pride in check, doing all of those things helps us come together in unity, helps us to live as the people of God. So, my last kind of point on this. The exemplary life of Christ is a life that is at home in the truth. It is a life that has undergone training to keep pride in check. Every week I've made the same statement to you. I told you the very first week we're going to do two things every week. The Apostles' Creed, and I'm going to make the same statement to you. That we don't believe that truth is a concept. It is a concept, but we don't believe it's merely a concept. That we believe truth is a person. And that person has a birth date. That person had a mother. That person has a death date. That person has a resurrection date. And when you see this statement, the exemplary life of Christ, we get to understand what truth is when we look at Christ. And that life that was lived out before us is a life that was at home in the truth. It's a life that lives out that truth. So I have one more Hauerwas quote, and I'm going to wrap it all up. Here's the last one. God has given us a wonderful exercise for training in truthfulness. That exercise is called prayer. To learn to pray is to have our bodies formed by the truth and love that move the sun and stars. Somewhere I had a little mistake in there. It is an exercise for training in truthfulness. God has given us a wonderful exercise for training in truthfulness. It's called prayer. Now, I know for a lot of us, we're going to be honest, aren't we? Prayer's hard. And part of what makes prayer hard is that most of us were not taught how to pray properly. What I mean by that is for most of us, the way we were taught to pray was that we just pray for the needs of those around us. And that's important, okay? There's nothing wrong with praying for that. There's nothing wrong with praying for loved ones. There's nothing wrong with praying for sickness. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's just a little piece of what prayer really is. And the incredible thing is that God has given us an incredible life with him that we call prayer. Now, last week for Father's Day, if you didn't get to pick one up, men, there's some back there. Ladies, if you want one and you steal, no, don't steal. If you want one and you happen to take one home, I won't call you on it because it's a really good little book. We have some extras back there. But this little book that we gave out for Father's Day, it's called a prayer map for men, and it's just a great little prayer journal and asks you questions, and I encourage you to use it. There's more back there on the information desk. Feel free to pick one up and use it, okay? I want you to use it because I think it will help. But one of the other things is that I brought with me, I ordered another one of these that Amazon told me would be here on Saturday. They did not tell the truth. And it'll be here tomorrow. But this is one of them that I have. And so I have a screen up here there's 3 different versions of this book. This is the blue one. There's a green one. I think that one's green. It might be black, but I think it's green. And then a red one. But the blue one, which is this one, is called A Guide to Prayer for Ministers and Other Servants. And then there's a guide to prayer for all who seek God and a guide to prayer for all who walk with God. These are about $20 on Amazon. If you ever use Christian book distributors, I think they're like $14 on there. This little book is absolutely incredible, okay? And I can't say enough about it. And since we're all being honest, I go through periods where I use this religiously nearly every day, and then I go through 6 or 12 months where I don't pick it up. And this week I have been challenged because I'm coming off of 6 to 12 months where I haven't picked it up. But I've been challenged this week to start picking it back up. So I know we're humans. It ebbs and flows. But I think this little book is just a powerful, powerful little book. And what it is it's constructed week by week. And so you can look in it and it will say, I marked where we are this week. So it'll have a little thing at the top of each chapter that says that you start reading this week if the Sunday of this year falls between June 19th and June 25th. All right, today's the 26th, so we really should go to the next chapter. But this was last week's chapter. And it has scripture for you that you could read every day. But then it also has different little just kind of stories or little kind of things about God. But then it has prayers, and then it closes with a hymn. And the reason I think this is so valuable is because it's such a great way to learn how to pray. When we hear other people pray, when we learn how other people pray, it changes the way that we pray. So I want to read, this is this week, all right? I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's kind of King Jamesy. It's by Hannah. It's from the book, The Christian Secret of a Happy Life by Hannah Whitall Smith. But I want you just to hear, this is the prayer for this week. Lord Jesus, I believe that you are able and willing to deliver me from all the care and unrest and bondage of my Christian life. I believe that you did die to set me free, not only in my future, but here and now. I believe that you are stronger than sin and that you can keep me, even me, in my extreme weakness from falling in the snares or yielding obedience to its commands. And Lord, I am going to trust you to keep me. I have tried keeping it myself and I've failed most grievously. I am absolutely helpless. So now I will trust in thee. I will give myself to thee. I keep back no reserves, body, soul, and spirit. I present myself to thee as a piece of clay to be fashioned into anything that thy love and thy wisdom shall choose, and I now am thine. I believe thou dost accept that which I present to thee. I believe that this poor, weak, foolish heart that has been taken possession of by thee, and that thou hast even in the very moment begin to work in me to will and to do thy good pleasure. I trust thee utterly, and I trust in thee now. And this little book is just full of little prayers like that by all people from all through Christian history. And these little books, I think, are a place to start. A place for us as the people of God to say, how do we begin to reshape our lives by the truth? And I think Hauerwas is right. It starts with prayer. Well, the first passage we read today was from Colossians. And what is Colossians chapter 1 other than a prayer? It's Paul saying, this is how I'm praying for you. And as the people of God, if we want to learn how are we at home in the truth, we learn it through spending time with the truth, with Christ. We learn it by seeing the example that he has lived before us. We learn it by spending time with him. And it happens in prayer. And I know it's hard. I know that so many times we get to the moment when we don't know how to pray. I know that we face moments when we think, I don't know even what to say to God in this moment. And my prayer is these little books, and if I could buy every one of you one, I would, or the book in the middle of this book called Psalms, are a phenomenal place to just turn and to open and to say, God, use these words to shape my heart. Use these words to teach me how to pray. Use these words so that I might know you better. And in knowing you better, my life is changed and I become a person of truth. This morning, my hope and my prayer is that we commit ourselves as the people of God, as Hauerwas says, to the wonderful exercise for training in truthfulness. And the exercise is prayer. That we become a people of prayer, that we become a people of the truth, that we become a people who in those moments we can honestly say, Pastor, I struggle with prayer. You're not alone. I struggle in prayer. We all struggle with it. But it's something that God has given us as a gift, and we have the opportunity to fill our lives with a conversation with the truth. Today, as we close, we're going to close as we have been closing for a while. John's going to come and lead us in a song. Pastor James will be over at this altar if you would like a pastor to pray with. If you need to be anointed or like to be anointed for healing for any reason, I will be right down here at this altar. Whether that healing is physical, emotional, spiritual, I would love to pray with you. But some of you, as we sing, might just want to find a place to pray. A place to say, Lord, I struggle making this a discipline in my life. I struggle making this a part of my life. Lord, help me. I hope these little books, and if anybody wants to look at this one, and I've got another one coming tomorrow apparently, if you want to come and just look through it, I just come and look through it. It's a great place to start. It's a great place to learn. So let us stand today as we sing.